According to the UN's Environment Chief, Inga Anderson, and other environmental experts, nature is sending us a message with the coronavirus pandemic and the ongoing climate crisis. And it appears the message hit the nail on the head if the impact of the pandemic on the world environment is anything to go by. With lockdowns implemented in many countries of the world, the land and air space have been spared months of pollution, and as a result, carbon footprints have been significantly reduced. If we also consider the conversation centered around the origin of the COVID-19 virus, how much of these activities combined led us here? Let's consider some thoughts from this report by Esther Omokpariola, where she explores the possibility of the diseases transmitted from animals to humans.
A UN Global Environment Outlook report on 2019 had warned that the damage to the planet is so dire that people's human health will be increasingly threatened unless urgent action is taken. The report, which was produced by 250 scientists, say that either we drastically scale up environmental protections or cities and regions in Asia, Middle East and Africa could see millions of premature death by mid-century.
We also discussed the UN Decade on Restoration, on ecosystem restoration. And we thought particularly, we paid attention to forest restoration of degraded lands in the Sahel.
And following the emergence of coronavirus, scientists believe this global pandemic is caused by man's activities on his environment.
The COVID-19, it's one of what we call a zoonotic disease, in the sense that it has transferred from an animal to human. Then it has now gotten to human transmission.
God created some wild animals to be away from human beings, but our situation with them now, coming too close to them, playing with them, using them the way we want not to use them, can make the disease of animals to come into a spill over.
Although there are moves in finding a cure to the virus affecting the world, scientists believe adopting sustainable solutions is one sure way of containing the global pandemic.
Nature has been the one providing for everything, and it becomes very, very important in this pandemic that we look inwards, we take a look back to nature on how we can cure infectious diseases like this current pandemic.
All we can do now to find a way, there are two things we can do: find a way of eradicating, or we may decide to live with it, to find a way of living with it. Living with it means, like they have always told us, social distancing, which is also not easy. Wearing masks, which should be for a while, not continuously forever. Then we may start think of the Nnimmo Bassey. Even that vaccine takes a long time. The vaccine cannot be developed within a short and 10 years.
As the world grapples with the health crisis while adopting safety standards of hygiene to halt the spread of the virus, scientists believe countries need to take concrete action in reviewing some of its policies that will spearhead the cause for a cleaner and safer environment. Esther Omokpariola, TVC News, Lagos.
All right, this is Fireworks. Thank you for joining us on this edition. Let's now expand these complex yet related issues as I welcome environmental justice activist and director, Health of Mother Earth Foundation, Mr. Nnimmo Bassey. Welcome to Fireworks.
Thank you.
So, as before lockdown restrictions across the globe began to be eased, we saw how goats began visiting villages and dolphins swimming closer to shorelines. So it appears this lockdown, coronavirus pandemic, will be good for the earth after all.
Yes, we've seen some indications that the earth had a moment of respite, a moment to breathe again without interference of humans. Because in terms of relationship with biodiversity, humans are maybe the worst kind of predator that we have around on the planet. And so the moment humans were locked up in cages, in homes, restricted from being on the streets and city squares. The animals had to take up the spaces which had been contested and grabbed from them by humans. So they were more or less exercising their right to move about on Earth. And it's good for nature, but not so good for us.
Okay, but let's stay with the good aspect, with the earth space being free and the land, also being empty. Countries will meet their climate goals faster.
Yes, that is one thing because the lockdown did not only restrict people to their homes for the fun of it. It also meant that people couldn't go to work. It meant that factories had to shut down or slow down production. It meant raw materials could not be extracted from different locations. It meant travel had to be less aircraft in the atmosphere, less cars on the streets, less ship in the oceans. So the pollution level generally would be expected to go down. That's general expectation. I mean, the computations will still have to be done to see by what margin and for how long the reduction will persist.
Now, with these outcomes, are lockdowns the way to go to help countries reach their climate goals faster, or do you see any other options?
That's a very interesting way to put it. I do not think that the lockdown can be used as a mechanism for fighting global warming, because the lockdown, resulted in a lot of human rights abuses. People were restricted in a way that was not agreed to. We saw more of authoritarian activities by governments. And of course, governments keeping to their climate goals requires much more than keeping people away from the streets. And so the climate impact of the lockdown could just be what we may call accidental or incidental activity, event that happened. It can never be taken as itself being a means by which countries will meet their climate goals. It could be a period for rethinking what needs to be done. It could be a time for governments to really look at what they have said they would do towards tackling global warming and whether that would work in view of the pandemic and the lockdown. What really have we learned by being kept away from the streets, from our shops? Are we dead because we don't consume as much as we used to consume? Are we so bad off, or well better? Are we better off by staying at home instead of being in the air or being on the highways, polluting every time? These are the things that the pandemic has given us a time to reflect on. But to what level governments would use this time to reassess their climate goals, that is what we're yet to see.
There'll be time to look at how to rethink healthier lifestyles, especially after corona-induced lockdowns. But is there a direct link between humans encroaching on ecosystems and the coronavirus, or are some forces trying to further their agenda and then using the danger of human interaction with ecosystems as a convenient excuse?
That is a loaded question, and of course, there are many stories flying about conspiracy theories, about people who want to consciously depopulate the world, that is, reduce human population, not by birth control, but by actually getting people dead so that the population could go down. There are stories like that, and of course, the pandemic has led to a lot of fatalities, which is very unfortunate. But basically, there are two main propositions about the origin of this coronavirus, this special coronavirus of COVID-19. Coronavirus is not a new virus, but the variety that we have that came up in 2019 is new. And that's why it's called novel coronavirus. Now, there are two possible ways. That one is that by human destruction of habitats, certain animal species have been forced to come closer to human populations. Or it could also be that because of human desire for bushmeat or game, that this could lead to transmission of this virus from animal to humans. And the bat has been fingered and the pangolin. as possibly being the vectors that carried this virus, and transferred it to human beings. So that could be that's one major explanation we've had about the origin of the virus, of the disease also. The main reason why some people have ruled out the possibility of this virus having been manipulated or engineered in the laboratory is that from what the scientists have examined the virus, they've not seen markers by which they could trace human interference with the genetic makeup of the virus. But what that explanation has not told us is that genetic engineers actually have ways, means, methods of genetic engineering of organisms in a way that doesn't leave traces that they were genetically engineered. So that explanation by ruling out human interference with the coronavirus, it has been taken up by mainstream media, popularized around the world. It's almost like a gospel. But the possibility that there's been human interference cannot be ruled out just because some people said, no, we cannot find the markers. They have to further examine to see whether there's a possibility that the markers could have been, the methods that would not reveal the markers have been utilized. Then we can be convinced that there was no possibility of human interference. And also, we need to also question why countries should invest resources in creating very virulent viruses, or making viruses that can create diseases that are difficult to cure, just because they want to have an upper hand in possibilities of warfare. The whole concept of investing resources and endangering human lives because of political power needs to be questioned at this time also.
The debate on that continues. Now, the second outcome of your initial narrative is that, isn't it curious, and I wonder if you've observed, that scientists or conservationists, environmental justice activists like you, have been united in the message of global warming, of CO2 targets, of rising sea levels, but during the coronavirus pandemic, have been interestingly divided on whether the virus is naturally occurring or genetically engineered?
That's it. Well, activists are part of the human population, and so we all have tendencies in leaning to one political position or the other. We have ethical foundations, and people read conclusions from different ways. And just like people are exploiting the situation, including governments who are using the opportunity to attract resources to get debt relief from the international financial institutions, people moving money around, shuffling things around for purpose of garnering influence. But in terms of agreement, yes, there's a lot of disagreement, but I think many people are just unwilling to allow the possibility that this could have been artificially created, whereas we do know that there are laboratories and institutions set up for production of biological weapons. And some of these weapons could maybe be tested without consent of the victims or people who end up being victims, especially in regard to the global balance of power. If powerful countries decide to carry out testing, they would very well do such testing if they know that the implication would be the negative implication will be more on the poorer sectors on the world. We've seen in terms of things that have not been experimented yet in terms of climate change. We have processes like geoengineering, which is planetary level engineering of grabbing the thermostat, more or less, of the climatic system and controlling weather patterns, or putting some mechanisms like in the sky, whitening clouds, fertilizing the oceans to absorb more carbon dioxide, genetically engineering trees to be more intense in terms of photosynthesis by taking more carbon out of the atmosphere, creating white surfaces on Earth to increase the albedo effect, or effect of white surface reflecting radiation back to space. And none of those experiments can be carried out outside of the laboratory on a small scale. And so if they are carried out on a big scale, you're certainly going to find that those who carry out the experiment would ensure that they are safe from the negative impact, and then poorer countries would suffer all the consequences. More floods, more droughts in Africa, for example, whereas others may have something slightly more beneficial to them. But in terms of the virus itself, I think except for maybe one major political leader in the world who points a finger to artificial generation of the disease, it's like there's a general consensus that nobody should talk about that possibility. But we do need to talk about it. We need to understand also that people have a right to hold their own views, but these views must be...
From your narrative, I take it you are on the side of the possibility that this virus has been artificially generated. But I'd like you to say that yourself, but that will be after the break. You're watching Fireworks. My guest today is the Director, Health of Mother Earth Foundation, Nnimmo Bassey. We'll be right back. Stay with Fireworks. So thank you for staying tuned to Fireworks. If you've been following our conversation in the last half hour or so, we've been looking at the impact of human activity on corona-induced, or the lack of human activity rather, on corona-induced lockdowns across the world. And of course, we've also explored the debate about whether the COVID-19 virus has been artificially generated or naturally occurring. My guest today, who has been so gracious and patient, is the Director, Health of Mother Earth Foundation, environmental justice activist, Nnimmo Bassey. Thank you for holding on. So,
thank you.
Where exactly do you belong? COVID-19 virus is naturally occurring or artificially generated?
Now, from what I do know, my position is that we should not rule out any of the two possibilities. So I'm not really pitching my tent on one side. I'm saying that the possibilities are there, that it's artificially generated for some particular reasons.
So what's the difference between your position and those who would rather keep quiet? You're sitting on the fence. You have to be categorical in your position.
I don't have a laboratory in which to examine the virus. So I'm only speaking from what I read, what is available out there, what researchers are saying. And so we need to have a situation where the world agrees that it need to get to the root of this matter. Because if you don't get the root of the matter, all the responses will just be artificial also, and they will not have long-term positive impacts.
So where are the environmentalists at this very critical time of coronavirus-induced lockdown to set agenda for healthier lifestyles, particularly after the lockdowns? Where are they?
This is a debate. Yeah, this is a debate, and this is the organizing. There's a lot of organizing going on. There's much more coming together internationally of activists to look at the post-pandemic era. And we don't generally want the situation of people to go back to business as usual. But you can be sure that when the lockdown is lifted today, people want to jump back to where they were before. If you're in Lagos, you notice that whenever there's a small relaxation, the streets are jammed again. People don't want to think twice before leaving their homes. People want to return to what they were used to doing. But this is the kind of attitude that is that needs to be critically re-examined.
But are the debates as visible as they were in the past? Are they as spirited? How many environmentalists in these parts, for instance, are talking about the growing piles of infected wastes and nose masks, which are a huge danger to public health?
I think why we may not see the debates on the streets is that people are restricted. You can't have mass movements on the street. You can have mass protests on the street. Just before the pandemic, we had a trend where you were having thousands of people marching on climate justice, calling for action by governments. But suddenly, activism is now in the air. People are using Zoom, Skype, and Google Hangouts, Facebook, and so many social media avenues to organize. So I believe things will be much clearer once the lockdown also goes
And
off.
that brings me to the next point, Nnimmo. How much of carbon emissions should environmentalists like you also take responsibility for? The same environmentalists who advocate for the conservation of the planet fly a lot for projects and conferences that contribute to airlines' carbon emissions.
That's right. But you find that we have fewer activists in the air than activists on the ground. And I think one thing that we've learned from the pandemic is that some of us don't need to be everywhere at every time. We need to become more invisible. We need to get the grassroots to do the work because they are the ones who are really feeling the impact, feeling the pinch from the lack of economic opportunities, lack of access to food, and lack of resources. And for me, I'm an organization, this is what we're emphasizing, what we're working on, getting the grassroots to actually lead, to lead not just by way of saying they are leading, but actually taking the lead so that the actions get back to the grassroots. And then by interconnecting all these various nodes of activism, we have a global impact in negotiations and in whatever needs to be done. And I'm personally very disappointed that the Conference of Parties of United Nations Framework on Climate Change could call off the climate conference for this year rather than having a virtual conference. There's no reason why they couldn't have set an example, an agenda to say we are meeting to negotiate virtually, not physically.
And that brings me to the next point. I'm glad you talked about Zoom and social media and all of that at the time. And that's why I'll also like to put it to you that it is debatable that there are fewer climate conservationists in the air than on land. So in the future, in the post-pandemic near future, will virtual life introduced by COVID make travel less for conservationists?
For conservationists and justice activists, I believe it will, because for 2 months or more, many of us have learned to work from home, and the tendency that people want to return to the old lifestyle can be contested. I believe there will be some modifications, and actually, there's no way to argue about whether we have more activists in the air than on the ground. We always have more on the ground because the people at the shorelines, at the polluted environments, there are much more than those who are attending conferences or going to international spaces for mobilizations and campaigns.
So in the future, post-pandemic, what recommendations are you making for humans to live healthier lifestyles? I'm talking about in terms of renewable energy solutions, because there's also a conversation about how minerals for solar batteries are sometimes mined by children and host communities get polluted. There are other aspects of the conversation that we can explore, but if we have time, we'll do that. But let's start with this one.
Well, extractive activities are inherently harmful. So there's always a need to balance what is the positive coming out of this negative activity. And unfortunately, renewable energy still depends to a large extent on mining and extraction. And when this extraction happens in countries in Africa, children get used, which is against the rights of the children to be exploited in that way. And that's very unfortunate. So that actually is also a source of campaign by anti-mining activists who are very much saying yes to life, no to mining, and standing up against that kind of exploitation going on, apart from the environmental degradation that we're seeing. And in fact, what this pandemic has given us time to think about also is to redefine what is progress, what is development. When can you say you have power? Which country in the world is really ready to confront this kind of virus that came up? What does it mean to think that we are advanced or we're not advanced? We need to re-examine all this so that we can now chart a pathway forward. And that pathway forward, to me, is the respect of the right of the planet, the right of Mother Earth, to maintain her natural cycles and to provide the services that keep the ecosystems healthy and by extension, human beings healthy. If we just keep on going the way of production, consumption, and destructive activities, then they would have lost the opportunity of reflecting on which is the best way going forward.
Speaking of reflection, wind energy blades, let me quickly get this also across. Wind energy blades are believed to be affecting birds, while solar panels take up spaces on land. In the sea, they block sunlight needed for ocean species to thrive. How do we rethink these approaches to energy solutions post-pandemic?
Well, for some of us, especially those of us in Africa, I believe that the arguments about wind vanes or the windmills killing birds sometimes can be exaggerated. But we have other challenges that this could also pose in Africa. For example, the biggest wind installation in Africa is at Lake Turkana in northern Kenya. And there's been a lot of land grabbing related to that project. So we're looking at the social and economic implications of this project, impacts on communities who are impacted negatively. But again, there's reason to hope, because if you look at the map of Africa, we have oil fields around the continent. You have platforms, floating platforms. All those platforms can be converted to solar panel farms or wind farms. So we wouldn't need to have interruptions on lands onshore so much, because really, whether we like it or not, oil is a dying resource that the world has to shift away from. In the heat of the pandemic, the price of oil dipped below zero in some places in the US. Right now in Nigeria, we're struggling and hoping that the price of a barrel of oil will rise to a level where we can maintain the revenue for the national budget. So it's really time again to think about, is this a resource we can depend on? If the world is moving to renewable energy, moving to other forms of energy, redefining development and progress, redefining the pathway to the future, we have to reconsider what is the basis of our economy.
True. Mr. Nnimmo Bassey, thank you very much. Huge lessons from the pandemic there. And from you, I've learned diplomacy and advocacy in this brief interaction. Thank you very much for your time on Fireworks.
Thank you for having me.
After the pandemic, humans may need to rethink their attitude to habitation or cohabitation, as the case may be. Humans should not continue to destroy habitats, kill wildlife, bring down forests, pollute oceans, thereby jeopardizing the survival of other species. And even if the debate on whether COVID-19 is naturally occurring or genetically engineered continues, humans will do well to still learn to share nature with other species. Until the next one, I am Bukola Samuel-Wemimo. Bye for now.